Attack on Titan, Frieren, Vinland Saga, Fullmetal Alchemist, Monster, loads of the Ghibli movies, and so many more anime are either set or based around Europe. But by comparison, it's very rare for a Western show to be set in Japan, and usually when they are, it's just like the typical Western guy in Japan plotline. There is a clear difference here, so I wanted to look at where did anime's fascination with Europe come from, and why are so many set in Europe? To begin, we first have to go back in history to a period in Japan called the Sakoku, which basically means closed country, and lasted from the 1630s for over 200 years to 1854. Basically, as the name suggests, this meant that not many people were allowed in or out of Japan. Think of it kind of like North Korea today. But basically in 1854, the US showed up and they had these massive steam engine ships and even bigger guns, and Japan was like, okay, cool, we are severely cooked because they didn't have the same level of technology as what was out there. And then as a result, Japan signed a treaty to open back up to the world for trade, and this was the beginning of Western literature and culture beginning to go into Japan for the first time after 200 years, and it got really popular really quickly. And this was the beginning of Japan's fascination with Europe, especially the medieval period. Now what is interesting, right, is obviously the Japanese find Europe very exotic, particularly the medieval period, right? But from a person who's from Europe, who I've lived in the UK my whole life, I don't think I'm speaking for myself, where I would say a lot of people, myself included, find Japan very fascinating, specifically, you know, the samurai, ninja period. So I feel like Japan found Europe cool and Europe found Japan cool, right? Okay. But how does this affect anime specifically? So jumping forward by about 100 years now, in the 1960s, the anime boom began in both Japan, Europe, and the US, with the first real big hit being Astro Boy in 1963. It was super popular globally, like I mentioned, but in particular, the most important thing for anime's obsession about Europe happened 10 years later, with Heidi, Girl in the Alps being released in 1974. Now, this is an anime based on the Swiss novel called Heidi, which makes sense, and it follows a young orphan girl who was sent to live with her grandfather in the Swiss Alps. Now, I'll be honest, I've never seen this anime before. I only came across it when researching this video, and that's because apparently in the US and the UK it wasn't very popular, but was pretty much popular everywhere else. Like in Japan it was massive, and in loads of other Western countries such as Spain, Germany, Italy, France, it was also super popular. In fact, I even saw comments of people saying that people in like Germany and Italy, they didn't even realize it was actually anime. They just thought it was produced by like somebody from their country, basically. Like, this show was so popular that apparently to this day, thousands of Japanese tourists go to the place in the Swiss Alps called Heideland just because of how popular the show was. Now, there is a couple reasons why Heidi is so important. Number one, it was set in the Swiss Alps, like I mentioned, and it painted them as some kind of magical fantasy land, which really piqued the Japanese interest. Number two is that it's based off a real European novel and was part of this sub-niche called the World Masterpiece Theatre, in which studios would convert old traditional novels into anime series. For example, you had A Dog of Flanders, and another one is the anime version of Peter Pan. And number three, which is very cool, is that Heidi was actually worked on by Ieso Takahata, who directed Heidi, and Hayao Miyazaki, who worked on the layout, scene design, and screenplay for the show. Now, if you don't know who they are, they're super important because they later went on to co-found Studio Ghibli in 1985. Now, Ghibli is arguably the most iconic anime studios of all time. To put it into one sentence, only two animes have ever won an Oscar, these two both being made by Studio Ghibli, Spirited Away and The Boy and the Heron. Ghibli has many things that make them super unique to them. For one, they have their visual design, they almost only do movies. And a big reason for this, interestingly, was that Miyazaki and Takahata hated the chaos of making Heidi as a TV show, and they felt like you couldn't do the animation justice doing it as a TV show, and this actually influenced them massively when making Ghibli to just pretty much only do movies. But what is super important, coming back to the start of this video, is Ghibli sets loads and loads of their movies in Europe. For example, Howl's Moving Castle, Castle in the Sky, and Kiki's Delivery Service. What's interesting though is that all of these are set in like a mismatch of multiple European countries such as England, Wales, Germany, France, and many others, instead of being just one particular place, such as how Heidi was in the Swiss Alps. And Miyazaki later said that he wants to create an exotic version of Europe that Japanese people imagine. So coming back, the work of Heidi from Miyazaki and Takahata working on the show and it being so popular massively influenced them to one, make Studio Ghibli, but also to set so many of these shows in this exotic European setting. An example that I love is one of my favorite Ghibli movies is Howl's Moving Castle, and it has multiple different locations in Europe merged together. For example, it kind of reminds me of like an industrial Britain, France, or Germany. But then you also have scenes from like the Alps and the lush green that just to me remind me of like the Italian Alps, for example. But it's not just to create an exotic Europe. That's not why Ghibli, for example, set loads of their movies in Europe. Another one is that Miyazaki himself is super anti-war. For example, he boycotted the Oscars in protest against the US-Iraq invasion in 2003. And if you've watched any Ghibli movies, you'll know that this is like a common theme. For example, Howl's Moving Castle or Porco Rosso are also just clear examples of anti-war messages. But basically, by setting it in this exotic European setting, they're able to not only play into the Japanese fantasy of Europe, which gives them obviously a bigger appeal to a wider market, but they're also able to make these anti-war messages without upsetting people in Japan, you know, bringing back trauma from World War II and the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. So what I'm trying to say is that by setting this anime in different European countries, they're able to make it a lot more digestible for the Japanese audience. But of course, it isn't just Ghibli that I wanted to talk about, right? There's loads of modern anime that are set in Europe. The first one to me, which is probably the easiest example, is Vinland Saga, right? This one is similar to the world masterpiece theatre that I mentioned in the sense that it's based off real stories and real people such as Thorfinn and King Canute, and covers real historical events such as the Vikings raiding England, but of course it does dramatize it massively. But it also, similar to Ghibli, has the anti-violence message, right? If you've seen season 1, Thorfinn was smoking everybody on an absolute violence, but in season 2 you have the whole you have no enemies, and it's a lot more peaceful. At least he's a lot more peaceful, right? Where it differs though is that in Vinland Saga, Europe, England is massively violent, right? There's carnage going on everywhere. Whereas in Ghibli, obviously, typically, even in times of conflict, Europe is still seen as this kind of like a magical fantasy land. Another clear example is AOT, right? You got Erwin, which is a German name, Erin, which is typically a Turkish name, but then Jaeger is more of a German name. And you have Jean or Jean, which I can't say because it's French and I struggle. But you get the picture, right? The names are from many different European countries. Also, of course, there is the strong Nazi comparisons, right? Mali and how they treat the Eldians is kind of how the Nazis treated the Jews. You know what I mean? They have them in those like specific areas that they can't leave. They're branded with the armbands and stuff like that. So it's definitely like clear comparisons there. And then the last one I want to talk about is Freerun. This was super interesting. I did not know this until researching this video, but Freerun is mostly set in like a fantasy medieval Germany. Again, pulling back on that, the Japanese idea of an exotic Europe. But what's really cool is that loads of the names are German, right? They're specific German words. So for example, Freerun means freeze in Germany because naturally she's like a cold person, of course. Himmel means heaven because he's like this heavenly type of character, you know what I mean? And then Eisen means iron because he's hard as shit, of course, right? There's loads and loads of examples, which I thought was really, really cool. And yeah, like I mentioned, right, Freerun especially definitely buys into that whole exotic type of Europe, which is just shown throughout the series with the amazing scenery and landscape. So it's definitely a combination of anime being set in Europe means that the writers can make their criticisms and judgments without it seeming distasteful, but also to many people in Japan, Europe just seems super exotic. Another interesting fact that I learned is it's actually this thing called Paris syndrome, which I have heard of before. Basically, it's that when you visit Paris, you're disappointed because it doesn't live up to what you imagined it would be. But apparently for Japanese people, it's like especially prevalent. And I guess for sure that anime definitely has to play some level of a factor into building up those expectations, and then you go there and it's just not what you hoped it would be. Now, I'll say this for anybody who's looking to come to London, if you're expecting to find some Howl's Moving Castle level visuals, trust me, it's not going to be like that. I'm sorry. Now, if you want to learn more about Ghibli Studios and all the other 16 anime studios, I made a video covering every single one in detail, so click here to check it out.